Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this working session, The Imperative of Inclusion, Marginalized Communities in the Fight Against Corruption. I've been told that we absolutely must finish promptly and on time, so I'm going to start promptly and on time rather than leaving that customary couple of minutes that we normally have at the beginnings of sessions like this. So, welcome. My name is Jim Fitzgerald. I am the moderator for today's session, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I am the director of the Equal Rights Trust. We're an international independent organization which works to support the development, adoption, implementation, and use of equality laws. As part of our work on the use of equality laws, in 2020, we established a partnership with Transparency International, the global anti-corruption organization, to investigate the links between discrimination and corruption. There was, at that time, already very significant evidence on the correlation between these two harms. Evidence that groups exposed to discrimination experience corruption differently and disproportionately than other people. But we wanted to go beyond this. We wanted to establish whether there is, in fact, a causal rather than merely correlative relationship between discrimination and corruption. Working with partners from across the world, from Guatemala to Uzbekistan and from Papua New Guinea to the United Kingdom, we documented cases of corruption arising on grounds including age, ethnicity, gender, race, religion, and sexual orientation, among others. The resulting report, Defying Exclusion, which was published in 2021, presented evidence of a strong causal link between discrimination and corruption, identifying 4 different dimensions or dynamics of what we termed discriminatory corruption. Amongst the recommendations in that report was that those working to combat corruption and discrimination, respectively, should work together, should collaborate and engage in programs of reciprocal training and mutual support, and that there should be further research into the links between these two harms. So, I am delighted to be here moderating this panel, which brings together activists working on discrimination and corruption, who bring different perspectives on these issues and who are looking at how they can work together to address these joint and interconnected harms. We're joined today by 4 expert speakers, each of whom brings a different, unique perspective on the links between discrimination and corruption, from different places, from working with different marginalized communities in different parts of the world. Brigitte Chelebia is Director of Justice Without Frontiers from Lebanon. Maria Kolokolova is the co-founder of the Civic Educators Association in Ukraine. Norin Im is Program Director from Transparency International in Cambodia. And Ruben Figueroa Mariona is an LGBT rights educator and monitoring and evaluation specialist from Conchavis Trans in El Salvador. So a truly global and diverse panel of experts we have with us today. This panel has been convened by Outright International as part of its GLIDE initiative. GLIDE stands for Global LGBTQI+ Inclusive Democracy and Empowerment. It's a unique collaboration between Outright International, Synergia, Initiatives for Human Rights, and the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. It seeks to stimulate participation and engagement of LGBTIQ persons and organizations in democratic spaces and processes. And for 2024, the initiative has identified corruption and transparency as key issues on which it wants to focus, and it has convened this panel as part of that program of action. Through today's discussion, we hope to explore the links between corruption and discrimination for marginalized communities, specifically young people, women, persons with disabilities, and LGBTIQ+ communities, and to identify sustainable and effective solutions to combat corruption that center the experiences of these communities. The panel is structured into 3 parts. In a moment, I'll introduce all of the panelists and ask each of them to speak a bit about the corruption environment in their country, the intersections which they have identified between corruption and discrimination, and the work which they've been doing on these issues. Second, we'll pose some questions to panelists about the different dynamics of discriminatory corruption and how these dynamics present in their respective contexts. And finally, we'll open the floor to all of you so that you can ask questions and make comments. So, moving to our first speaker. Brigitte Chelebien is an attorney at law and the executive director and founder of Justice Without Frontiers. She's led programs to promote women's rights, access to justice, and sexual and gender-based violence. She has worked as an expert with different national, European, and UN agencies, serving, amongst other things, on the UN Women roster on eliminating violence against women. She is an expert on gender policies who has managed and implemented several projects to combat corruption and is currently managing a project to create a legal task force specialized in combating corruption in Lebanon. Brigitte, please, tell us a little bit about the situation in terms of corruption in Lebanon and the work which you've been doing.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hello. First of all, I just want to tell you that I am very happy to be part of this panel and to have the opportunity to talk a bit about Lebanon and the current situation in our country. Just to give you a small introduction about Lebanon. Lebanon is a sectarian country. We have 19 sects. We have 15 personal status law. Everything is distributed in Lebanon, especially the high-level position with respect of what is your sect, who you are, from which political party. This is first. Secondly, in Lebanon faces several crises. Let's start from 2019 with the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, we had the Beirut port explosion. That till now the investigation is not finished, and we never know what is the truth, and perpetrators didn't come to were not prosecuted, and victims didn't get their rights, and we have thousands of victims and killed persons and people that they are suffering till now. We have to talk as well about the economic crisis that Lebanon is facing till date, the decrease of the Lebanese pound and the increase of the US dollar. So we have, on the other hand, the increase of vulnerability in Lebanon. And when we talk about increase of vulnerability, of course, we are talking about women and children, women and girls, and even men and elderly. And again, when we are talking about vulnerability, increase of vulnerability, we are talking about increasing of abuse, of trafficking, of crime committed, and we will have a chance to talk about some other crimes. We have as well the lack of access to minimum standard of to have a good life. People are not able, women, children, elderly, are not able to have enough access to electricity. This is the minimum things to have to live in dignity, access to medicine, access to education, and others. On the other hand, in Lebanon, we have, always say, a bouquet. Different, more than 6 laws that Lebanon adopted to fight corruption. They are very good, but it's not enough because they are not all applicable yet, not all known from all actors, lawyers, jurists, and others. And even in Lebanon, in sometimes we can talk about transparency in corruption, because the corruption is become part of our daily life. When we talk about corruption, the law in Lebanon focused on public sector only and didn't mention the private sector, noting that the private sector can benefit from a way or another from the corruption, and he is able to be part of it. This is one. Secondly, is just to give another overview, is that the budget that the government always have, there is no there is not enough budget to support vulnerable group or to support human rights. I will just give you an example. On 2023, the budget of the Ministry of Health was 6%. It became 5%. The budget for the Ministry of Social Affairs. When I talk about Ministry of Social Affairs, I talk about ministry with dealing directly with vulnerable population. Become 1%. It was 2% and become 1%. On the other hand, we have the justice sector who was not working enough because of the strike, because the judges, their salary become $100 or $50 per month because of the economic crisis. So even women who are victims of domestic violence, they were not able even to get protection decision. This was a big gap in our law. On the other hand, as I start at the beginning, I mentioned that there is 15 personal status law. 15 personal status law that are leading the life of all population in Lebanon and mainly affecting lives of women and girls and affecting their participation in their public life and even affecting the issuing of laws. What we are doing in Justice Without Frontiers, just to give you an overview, is that we start working on corruption, and we had our program with IFES where we start teaching people. People need to learn, to understand about laws, about how to report cases, and all this matter. And we focus our work with national organizations. So we have to start from the bottom for that. And we had a policy paper on this matter. And now what we are doing is we are creating a legal task force to support the whistleblower and to support any person who are in need to report a case of corruption. What I want to say at the end, it's very difficult to say that by our work we will end corruption. In this forum, there is organizations who are working since years and countries who are working since years, 20 years or more, and still they were not able to fight corruption. But from my point of view, to start fighting corruption is from the point where we start implementing the law, where we start ending the impunity. The corruption is an education, is a culture. So we have to fight this culture, and it will be through educating people, raising awareness, and working on the rule of law.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. You painted a very compelling picture of this sort of interaction between crisis, deprivation and economic difficulty, the sectarian environment, and how all of that sort of together interacts to create cycles of vulnerability to corruption. So thank you very much for that. Maria Kolokolova is a sociologist, researcher, and civic educator. She is the co-founder of the Civic Educators Association of Ukraine and a recognized expert in civic education and training. Before 2020, she worked as an associate professor at the School of Sociology at VN Karatsin Kharkiv National University. And since 2021, she has worked as a civic education consultant with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, where she has co-authored civic education courses for higher and vocational education institutions in Ukraine. Maria, please tell us a little about your work combating corruption in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you so much, Bridget, that you made this link to what I will talk about. You mentioned education and the role about education nurturing anti-corruption culture. First of all, thank you so much for being here, for the opportunity to speak about such a pivotal topic as corruption and its impact on marginalized communities. In 2023, Ukrainians identified corruption as the second major problem in Ukraine after the Russian full-scale invasion. And this dual struggle, external aggression and internal corruption, they go together, they intertwined, and they affect each other. And as was mentioned at the panel session by Sanjay, Predhan from Open Government Partnership, he mentioned this: two sides of corruption: internal harm that it causes to inequality, to threat to democracy, and external harm that it causes. And I can give an example how corruption in Ukraine, used by Russian propaganda nowadays to threaten our mobilization campaign, for example, and such arguments as "I will not fight for corrupt politicians," or "I will go to fight after children of corrupt officials will go." This is used by Russian propaganda to undermine our national security. While Ukraine has established a certain legislation, policies, and institutions to fight corruption, the problem persists, affecting millions of Ukrainians every year. Corruption negatively affects young people, threatening their social mobility. Mainstreaming anti-corruption efforts is essential to create resilient society and to follow our aspirations for European integration. One of the key preventive mechanisms against corruption is active civil society, which we represent here today. Numerous studies have demonstrated that active civil society starts from youth engagement. However, in Ukraine, on the one hand, youth has strong national and European identity, has demand on change, but on the other hand, our youth doesn't have enough political voice and cannot influence the political process, doesn't have resources to be active part in political processes. Recognizing this, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in 2018 launched a program to introduce civic education into university curricula. This program introduced interactive teaching course, which is called Democracy from Theory to Practice, to empower young people with knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be active citizenship and to build democracy. The course, Democracy from Theory to Practice, is built on the premise that you cannot teach democracy or you cannot teach civic engagement from textbook. You need to participate. And this course stands on three essential components. The first is theoretical component, where I used to be educator also of this course in Kharkiv National University. So we teach students to understand what is democracy, what is human rights, civic participation, mechanism of civic engagement, and so on. The second is interactive teaching methods that complement this theory and to strengthen hard and soft skills of students to open public debates, to resolve conflicts, to discuss different social and political issues, to be critical, to have skills like digital literacy and so on. And the third part is a project part where students actually try to identify some social problem and try to solve it in teamwork. And evidence shows that civic education can positively correlate with anti-corruption attitudes. And previous research in other societies show that higher knowledge of civics combined with democratic values can lead to intolerance of corruption, can decreases the permissiveness of corruption in society. And to test this hypothesis of Ukraine, we surveyed our alumni of this civic education course across Ukraine in different universities. So now this course is taught, to understand the scale and importance of this, is taught at 50 universities all around Ukraine in 19 regions of Ukraine. So we asked the last year alumni to take the survey and to address some questions regarding corruption and their perception of corruption. So this small-scale survey, we received around 100 respondents from our last year course alumni. The average age of them is 21, so you also understand the audience, how young they are. And here we come to the point that was mentioned at the last panel session, that here we not only to discuss the problems, but also to offer solutions and to give a hope. And I will just briefly describe what our students said and how civic education can actually empower students. So first of all, I will also mention that this course doesn't cover topic of corruption. So this is what they learned from other topics such as rule of law, transparency, principles of democracy, human rights, and so on. So basically, the majority, the 3/4 of survey students said that the course strengthened their negative attitudes towards corruption and equipped them with knowledge and skills how to combat it. The survey also revealed zero tolerance to corruption. 87% of survey students strongly agree that small bribes to officials are strongly disagree that the small bribes to officials are permissible. And furthermore, students believe that fighting corruption is the responsibility of every citizen, and around 90% of them say that they are ready to fight corruption themselves. And just to finish, I will say that not only these attitudes and not only these values this course actually nurture students and develop, but also they take real action, and their student projects show the interest to this topic and how they try to address corruption at university level and on their local regional level in their communities. The fight against corruption cannot be postponed until the end of war. That's also what our graduates say. And in conclusion, the fight against corruption begins with empowerment of youth and with civic education. And this way we can enable to build better and more transparent society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. A really strong call to action around the importance of civic education and in particular youth empowerment. So thank you very much for that. Norin Im, our third speaker, is the program director at Transparency International Cambodia, where he has been working for the last 8 years. Prior to that, he worked in Cambodian human rights organizations for a further 7 years. So he brings a great deal of experience and expertise to the table. He has also kindly stepped in at the last minute in place of someone else. So thank you very much, Norin, for being with us. Please tell us about your perspectives on these issues of corruption and in particular the link back to discrimination and marginalization.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here. I just want to give a context of corruption in Cambodia. Cambodia received very low score for corruption perception index. We received only 22 of 100. And we rank 158 out of 180. Its corruption in the country is very rampant and widespread. We rank only about the second lowest in Southeast Asia. It's only about Myanmar, which is a country in civil war. And we are also ranked 4th in Asia Pacific, just about North Korea, Afghanistan, and Myanmar. So, as I mentioned, it's still very rampant, and corruption has been the tool to enrich and build solidarity among political elite, so that they can enrich themselves, but also to maintain their power over the past 4 decades. So the country came out of the genocide regime in 1979, and there's no change of political regime ever since. So corruption, as I mentioned, is very widespread, and it's a tool for them to maintain their power. And for TI Cambodia, we have engaged in a lot of priority. We work on, for example, on public resource governance, on national budget, public financial management reform. We work on public procurement. We work on climate financing. We work on illicit financial flow. We work on business integrity. But one of the key component for TI Cambodia is on youth empowerment and youth-led action. A country that came out of the civil war is dominated by young generation. The youth, our demography is dominated by youth, so especially those under 35 years old. So that's why we have a lot of intervention working with them in the hope that one day they can be the agent for change, for good for the country. So we have, over the years, we have engaged in various initiatives, for example, in the intensive training on democracy, good governance, corruption, on various other issues related to accountability and so on. And we have done various activities, for example, youth camp, youth-led initiative, youth young leadership program, debate competition, essay competition, and other initiatives. And we see that we are also part of the regional network, the ASEAN Tech, the Southeast Asian network for transparent and accountable governance, which is also funded by IFES. That's why we are part of the project. And for our engagement with you, we have seen that we can see that they are eager to engage in corruption fighting, but there are a lot of barriers, especially the space for them to engage. For example, in terms of political climate, they don't feel secure, they are afraid of retaliation and so on. And even from parents, they also do not want their children to engage in sensitive issues because it can put their children at risk. For example, parents don't want children to engage in corruption fighting. And even in school, as I mentioned, because of the political context, even in school, children are not allowed to talk about certain critical issues, including politics, domestic politics, and even corruption. So there are a lot of initiatives that we have been done, and we will continue. And I think I pause here and will continue later on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear what you said about the kind of social barriers to people engaging in anti-corruption activism, particularly groups that may be marginalized or invisible in other ways, such as younger people. So I think there's a lot of resonance there with what you've said to other grounds of discrimination, other contexts as well. So thank you very much for that. Ruben Figueroa Mariona is a Salvadorian activist who works to fight for LGBTQ+ rights. Since 2022, he has worked with Comchavis Trans, a non-governmental LGBTQI+ organization in the Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Department. He's undertaken research about the social and cultural dynamics in public spaces, as well as the historical memories of cultural patrimony. He's conducted social analysis and research both for his own organization and for ILGA Latin America Caribbean. He's conducted empowerment workshops both with young LGBTQ+ community leaders and with government officials, and has advocated for public institutions to be more sensitive to LGBTQ+ rights. So, Ruben, thank you very much for being here with us. What's your perspective on corruption in El Salvador, and in particular on how that particularly impacts on the LGBTQ+ community that you work with?
Thank you, Jim. And thank you all for being here. I think that it's a great opportunity to represent my organization and to talk about the context in El Salvador. If you went to the after lunch plenary, you might have heard about the context of the democratic of how the democratic institutions are being destroyed in El Salvador and in these past 5 years. So I think that we have to focus also in how this is being a problem also for our communities, and specifically for the LGBT community. So in the last 5 years, El Salvador has seen a setback in transparency when it comes to monitoring the use of public funds for state activities. Since we have never been a nation that values transparency, I think that, at least in part, Central America, not just El Salvador, still has a strong commitment to expanding the mechanisms to access complete and updated information, as this comes before the guarantee of compliance with other rights or for the prevention of acts of corruption, which have historically plagued our region. There have been several high-profile cases in El Salvador that serve as examples of this situation where corruption that target and increases the vulnerability of vulnerable communities is made possible by a lack of transparency in the execution of official duties. Given the current state of affairs in which the nation is dealing with an exception regime that curtails certain constitutional guarantees to its citizens in an effort to curb gang violence, it is difficult and dangerous for me and for my organization to comment on a specific case of corruption. Despite this, it is possible to mention that in the last 5 years, the mechanisms in charge of guaranteeing transparency in the action of the state have been weakened. And this has allowed public officials to take advantage of many situations, such as COVID-19, to mention an example. Most of the prominent cases of alleged corruption in the last 5 years, that it's been the period of Nayib Bukele's mandate, have a common denominator, and that is the participation of key government officials, both executive and legislative. So I'm talking about the presidents but also the National Assembly. This affects all of society in general, but the LGBTQ plus community and trans people specifically is affected in a particular way. The improper and non-transparent use of economic resources does not allow the state to prioritize the needs of vulnerable groups, and on the contrary, for our community, for the LGBTQ community, these actions carried out by the state are on many occasions detrimental to our dignity and to the enjoyment of our rights. Human rights violations against the LGBT community have resulted from El Salvador exception regime, which has had a positive impact on the nation's security, and it has gained international attention for end gangs, right? But it's been a problem for the LGBT community since 2022. Comcavis Trans, my organization, has documented many cases of power abuse, aggressions, threats, and arbitrary detentions against people from the LGBTQ community. Money is enough when nobody steals was one of the 2019 campaign slogans from the president, suggesting that the efficient resource management could result in lower state debt. But over the past 5 years, the nation's foreign debt has risen and living standards have generally risen also, in addition to eroding transparency mechanisms. According to reports from Comcavis Trans and other LGBTQ+ organizations in El Salvador, the trans population is concerningly precarious in this regard. Since the state does not prioritize LGBTQ+ community, we at Comcavis Trans have not stopped coming up with initiatives to do so. Not only does our organization oppose to the lack of transparency, but so do other LGBTQ+ organizations in El Salvador. So in this context, I would like to draw attention to the various initiatives that we implemented over the past year to strengthen the social controllership and civic engagement abilities of the LGBTQ+ community with the help of international cooperation. We've created training programs for LGBTQ+ youth that focus on social responsibility, human rights, and democratic engagement. In order to address the needs that states fails to meet, we have created advocacy actions. We offer humanitarian assistance to LGBTQ+ individuals who have faced forcibly displaced from their homes, assisting them in creating more optimistic life plans for the community. And just something else, we hold training sessions with the goal of enabling LGBTQ+ community to stand up our rights while simultaneously defend democracy and demonstrating to the general population that we are aware of the use of public resources and that our need as a marginalized group must be given priority. And finally, in our country, the state's anti-gender discourse is fostering hate narratives against the LGBTQ+ community and does not allow us to integrate properly into social programs, seeking to erase our existence. So as an organization, we strategically oppose to this context, developing information and awareness campaigns to transform misconceptions about our diverse identities. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Ruben. I'm sorry to hurry you along there, but what you were sharing was very, very rich and interesting. I will give you another opportunity to come back on that in a moment. So thanks to all of the panelists. You've given us an insight into the very different contexts in which you're operating, the different dynamics of corruption, but also I at least can hear common themes around economic insecurity, around political destabilization and the use of political narratives, around marginalization and the way in which that can create vulnerability towards corruption and disincentivize enforcement action and create barriers in access to justice. So thank you all very much for that. I'd like us to turn now just to really look in a bit more detail around these links between discrimination and corruption. In the work that we did with Transparency International on this, we've identified 5 different links, 5 different typologies of what we call discriminatory corruption. These are, firstly, that discrimination can result in greater exposure to corruption, exactly as you were just saying, Ruben, in terms of the LGBTQ+ community in El Salvador. Secondly, that certain acts of corruption can be directly discriminatory, intrinsically discriminatory in their nature. Thirdly, that the impacts of corruption are felt disproportionately by groups exposed to discrimination, and all of you have spoken about that. Brigitte, you talked about this with respect to women in Lebanese society. Fourth, that both discrimination and corruption can result in barriers in terms of access to justice and enforcement. And fifthly, that corruption can impede the effectiveness of measures which are designed to advance equality. So as I said, I'd like to sort of explore some of these specific dynamics and the way that they play out in each of your countries. I've got a couple of questions which I'll ask to each of you in turn. So Brigitte, maybe starting with you. We know that corruption disproportionately impacts communities experience marginalization in different ways, in disproportionate ways. Can you give us an example or some insight into the way that that plays out for women and other marginalized communities in Lebanon?
Yes, of course. Regarding women in Lebanon, we have lot of discriminatory law. I will start with the personal status law. As I mentioned, we have 15 personal status law, and there is a big discrimination against women with respect of divorce, annulation of marriage, separation, custody, alimony. And when we talk about personal status law, we are not talking about discrimination between men and women, but we are talking about discrimination between Christian women and Muslim women. And even within Christian women, there is a discrimination between Greek Catholic women and Greek Orthodox women and same for Muslim between Sunnite and Shiite. This is one. And recently we start having discrimination between the rich women and poor women because all court fees become in US dollar and only rich people unfortunately are able to access justice. This is one. Secondly, when we talk as well about women, we talk about nationality. In Lebanon, if a Lebanese woman got married with a foreigner person, she cannot give her nationality to her child. Everything is related to political issues, but she can give her nationality in one case, in case of if she has an illegitimate child. As well, I mentioned about the whole economic situation and the increase of vulnerability. And I mentioned that there is increase of abuse and of trafficking. And I just want to highlight about a big case or scandal in Lebanon. It's when 300 children, they were victim of online sexual harassment via TikTok. And they were recruited through influencer. And as well, the influencer used some children to recruit other children, and some families as well know about this matter. Unfortunately, the government is not taking, especially in our moment, the needed measures to prevent such kind of crimes and violation. On the other hand, as well, I want to highlight that I talked about all kinds of crises, but I did not mention that in the south, in Lebanon, we have a war, and we have thousands of women and children and families who were displaced from their home. And when we talk about displacement, we are talking about discrimination in access services, access medicines, maybe they are victims of sexual harassment, and again, there is a missing of precaution measures taken by the government, and this is the social, and this is the NGOs who are playing a part of this role. I will talk as well about the migrant workers. We have the kafala system in Lebanon. And when we talk about kafala system, we can think about trafficking, but we cannot think about trafficking because kafala system is mentioned in the law. So we have this issue. And I want to highlight the issue of the prisoners. I will give you just an example. We have one big prison in Lebanon. Is in Rumie. The capacity of this prison is for 4,000 persons, but the capacity of the prison is for 1,800 persons. And in this prison, we have now more than 4,000 persons in this prison. And the whole detention center capacity in Lebanon, they are for 4,670 persons, but now we have 8,000 persons, and this number are for 2023, and only 1,000 persons were, the capacity is for 4,670. We have 8,000 persons, and only 1,000 persons is convicted. And I will not talk about the discrimination that this population are facing. I will stop here and I will answer later.
Thank you very much. So turning to you, Norin, the work that you've done with youth groups in Cambodia and the impact of corruption on youth and younger people, what's the evidence that you've gathered around the disproportionate impacts of corruption on younger people?
Yeah, the key impact for them is mainly in education, especially when corruption is also rampant in the sector. With access, with money, for example, children can receive better treatment from the teacher, or they can go to a better class, or they can transfer to a better school within the public school. And when we talk about getting access to exam, they can also, with money, they can also get better grade. And especially for youth, if, for example, when they are engaging in exam to be public office, or money speak louder. So, for example, even we don't say it publicly, but every exam to be a public officer, you will need to pay money. For example, to be a police, you need to pay, for example, 200,000, or to be a doctor, you need to pay a certain amount of money. Every position within the government, you need to pay a certain amount of money. So the exam, the job is no longer merit-based for youth who work hard, who make a lot of effort to get a job, but it's all based on if you have the money, you get a job. And it means that those, especially youth or from marginalized background, from poor background, they cannot have that opportunity. So first of all, they don't have the opportunity, but second, you are getting someone that are not qualified and to do the job. And some certain job, it can put a lot of risk for the general population. And that is very prevalent in the country. And there are a lot of, when the other key discrimination and marginalization is also in public service delivery as well. As we talked earlier, that access to public service delivery normally have a stronger impact on those who from a low social economic background, those who are uneducated, those who are poor, those who are especially women, and those who do not have enough information and so on about public service delivery. So it's all impact on people who doesn't have the information and opportunity to engage. Yeah.
Thank you, Nordin. I think you've just opened up the next question that I really wanted to explore, which is about the fact that it's not only that corruption has a disproportionate impact on certain groups, it's that certain groups, because of their situation in society, are particularly exposed to corruption. They experience, they're more vulnerable to it than they would otherwise be. So, Maria, maybe I can turn to you with that question. What do you think? What have you found through your research around the role of things like social stigma and lack of political, economic and social voice in creating enhanced vulnerability to corruption for certain groups?
Thank you so much. Well, as a sociologist, I tend to look at evidence, and I tend to find some robust examples, some like surveys or studies on this topic, like impact of corruption on youth. Unfortunately, for the last 2.5 years since the invasion, there were not, at least I couldn't find any such robust evidence how corruption disproportionately affects youth. But there are some studies that show how corruption, a perception of corruption by youth, actually negatively impact youth and prospects and their perception of their career, mobility, and staying in the country and to find themselves and to contribute to the recovery of the country, because we have this problem now of a lot of displaced people internally and externally, and this also causes additional vulnerabilities and this intersectionality when people expose more to social services when they displaced. So this is the one thing. The second, interestingly, that prior to the full-scale invasion, there were some studies on the also perception of corruption among the whole population and incidents of corruption in daily life. And it was found that younger people tolerate corruption more than older population. And the one of reason was found that it's because they face corruption more often. So they kind of try to justify their behavior by saying that, okay, corruption is acceptable if it benefits me. It doesn't mean that this is majority of young people, but it's among other age groups, it's more than older people who don't have to, for example, register their business or receive education services or other services where you can face corruption. And also from this small-scale study that we conducted among our civic education course alumni, we asked them if they faced corruption over the last year. And interestingly, that university students in general in Ukraine, you cannot call them marginalized or disadvantaged, because compared to other youth groups like NEETs or VET students, they are more advantaged. They are from maybe more educated families. But they, like 1/3 of those 100 students, they say that they faced corruption over the last year in different spheres, in healthcare, in education, and law enforcement. And they also, majority of them, they said that corruption threatened their success in life, in their career. So this is something that should worry us, that why we need to tackle corruption, because youth is our future, and if they don't see the prospects in society, then it's a threat for our future development.
Thank you. Yeah, really important insight around the kind of that vulnerability and how that can create a corrosive effect in terms of public trust in the system, and a degree of tolerance or acceptance of corruption as just the way of doing things. So thank you very, very much. Ruben, you were talking already a bit about the particular ways in which LGBTIQ plus people are exposed to corruption because of their particularly marginalized situation within society in El Salvador. Could you tell us a little bit more about that evidence that you have of the very particular ways in which these groups are exposed to corruption?
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to come up with something that Maria was saying, that corruption is accepted if it works, and that is something that happens, or it's a very common speech in El Salvador, that people say that yes, maybe the current government is stealing money, but every other government in the past did that, but at least this government is do it well, or have solved the problem of the gangs, the problem of the security. So I don't care if the president is steal money, but at least have solved this problem. And as an organization, we may understand this speech, we may understand this context, because it has really changed, like the context of security, but all of the other aspects in life have. We are facing a really great crisis, and specifically in the access of the justice, I can mention that the LGBTQ plus community is, despite of the efforts of civil society organizations to carry out transparent investigations on cases of violence against LGBTQ people, and especially on hate crimes committed, even though these efforts that SEO make, the information that is not available, is not like free to us to go and review the information, but most of the cases are this information is not available for the public review through the institutions. So that denotes lack of transparency in the access of information on cases related to hate crimes. And Comcavis Trans have provided follow-up for the last 5 years. And in the last year, 3 of these cases of hate crime in El Salvador were brought to trial, and one of them was achieved conviction against the perpetrator, but there was no reference, or there was not an aggravating circumstance for sexual orientation or gender identity to this case of hate crime, despite the fact that it was proved that it was a hate crime based on gender identity. So I think that also in access to other services like healthcare or education, we are facing many problems, specifically because this government is promoting an anti-gender discourse, is promoting, is saying that we are like pushing up gender ideology, and that makes that criminalizes us, and that also makes our work even harder to achieve our goals. So I think that this context is very hard for our organization, but also for our work as LGBTQ plus organization.
Thank you so much, Ruben. I'm going to pause there and turn to our audience and invite you to ask any questions that you might have for our panelists about what they've said, about the work that they're doing. Yes, the lady in the dark shirt.
Hi, thank you for your very interesting presentations. I'm curious about any attempts in your countries to weaponize marginalized groups. I'm based in Malta, and some of the leaders of the ruling party are facing trial for corruption and other things, and they have been very successful. And I think a lot of politicians, populist politicians, also in other countries, are very successful in marginalizing people who are economically marginalized, but also in Malta we also see weaponizing LGBT plus equality, the achievements that which are a fact, but they have been achieved by this government, which has a lot of work to do on its reputation, as well as weaponizing youth and other groups to improve its reputation. So I wonder if this is happening in your countries as well.
Okay, excellent question. So the use or the exploitation of social stigma and prejudice against certain groups, whipping that up as a way of defending oneself from charges of corruption. We'll just take one more question before I go back to the panel, and we'll do them in pairs. So yes, sir.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Guilherme. I'm from Transparency International Brazil. I'm just wondering if and how in your countries does corruption play a role in preventing these marginalized communities from being elected to higher offices, to occupying positions within the public authorities and the public administration, higher courts, the legislative, how corruption prevents these communities from acquiring the voices that they deserve in the political process, mainly.
Excellent, thank you. So two very different questions, both though about the political process. So one about politicians exploiting marginalized groups to try and defend themselves or distract from accusations of corruption, and the second around how corruption impedes and impacts on certain groups' participation in the political space. Who would like to kick us off? Maybe we'll take the first question first. Okay, Brigitte.
I will start. In Lebanon, we are criminalizing the LGBTQI. We have an article in the penal code that it's not mentioning directly the LGBTQI, but in Lebanon, we are using this article to punish or to prosecute this community. There is different movement now in Lebanon working on this matter. We have some judgment, very good judgment that they are on behalf of the LGBT, but they are very few. But there is a big movement from religious leaders, some politicians, some specific organizations who are working against. And now there is a draft law that will be submitted to the parliament, and this draft law is to amend this article. This is one. Two, we have recently Lebanon, and not only in Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, Jordan, and other countries, there is this backlash when using the word of gender. So whenever we talk about gender or gender violation or sexual and gender-based violence, they said, they are working on LGBT. You have to be against them. And this is a very systemic and well-organized organization that they are working across some regions. And I think this is on international level, because even when we are talking about the digital safety on the international level in the IGF meeting as well, there is the issue of gender, that they don't want to use it in the policies paper, on the policies document, but to use the word of violence against women. So this is one of the challenges that we are facing, plus challenges that we are facing against refugees. Recently, we start having this issue with the Syrian refugees because of the increased percentage of crimes committed by Syrian refugees against Lebanese people, especially on crimes related to sexual harassment and other. They are very few. This is not acceptable, but this is what is happening now in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruben, did you want to come in on this question about?
No, in the other one.
The second one? Okay, then please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to come out with this because in El Salvador, you cannot openly say that you're a gay man, that you're a lesbian woman. If you want to be in a position of power, this is a challenge because many of the officials, many of the stakeholders are LGBTQ persons, but they cannot openly say that because they this context for the LGBTQ person is not great, and they can face I don't know, hostile actions from its own presidents. So recently in El Salvador, the Ministry of Culture issued a statement that just to make a context, that prohibit the use of cultural spaces to artistic groups, those whose content does not comply with the standards established for the enjoyment of Salvadorian families. And it is referred because these groups are making content about LGBTQ plus community. And I think that it's a good example to see how the government is acting about this vulnerable group. And I think that we can see this as an example that also we would never seen, at least in this moment, a person in a position on a position of power openly saying that they are part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you. Maria, Norin, do you want to come in on this question, or shall we go back to the floor?
I can just briefly address the second question. I just can mention that we have now like special situation in Ukraine because of the martial law. Many rights are restricted, and that's why youth has less chances and less opportunities to participate in political process. Like we don't have elections, for example, you cannot be elected or vote. But like prior to the full-scale invasion, youth just doesn't have this financial resources to who are the main actors on the political floor. It's the big party with big finances, so they knew some young person, like we are talking, for example, about this active students' youth of like 18, 21 years old, what power they have, how can they participate in political life actively.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Norin, did you want to come in briefly on this?
Yeah. Just want to add a little bit on the context of Cambodia. If we look at the current context, we see there a transition from key position, especially in politics, from one generation to another, and it looked like bureaucracy is dominated by young generation. But in fact, they are all the son, daughter of the previous generation, those who are in power. So what does it mean? It means that even if you look from the outside, you see that there is a transition from older generation to young generation. But in fact, it's mainly for only the elite family. And those youth, especially youth from the disadvantaged or poor background, it's really, really hard, find it really hard to break into that position, especially to take control or to access to that kind of key position or key jobs in the government. And also, in our context, political positions or jobs are still very risky. So there are not many, even politicians themselves, they don't really supporting their daughters to engage extensively in politics. There are still limited number of women engaging in politics. There are some women who are sitting in the parliament. There are some women in the government, but for the key and top position are normally dominated by men. So it's still men business in the country.
Thank you very much for that. So turning back to the floor, can I see hands? Jamie, I saw your hand up before, so we'll go to you first. Just here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. I'm Jamie. I work at the Transparency International Secretariat, doing research with Jim and Equal Rights Trust very much on this topic. We're exploring the experience of marginalized communities in sub-Saharan Africa, how they face corruption in the education and health sectors. So I found it extremely interesting to hear similar things from across different regions. My question is, well, from this project, what we've really found out is that to really work on this issue, we need to kind of bring together anti-corruption actors who have their expertise in that field, but very much with actors who have more expertise in the equality space, or actors who represent interest groups who represent the marginalized communities. And what I really like about this panel is you're quite a diverse bunch. I mean, you really have anti-corruption organizations, but also organizations representing different marginalized groups. So I would like to know, do you have experience working with the other kind of actors? If so, how's that experience been? And if not, do you see kind of potential collaboration along these lines as possible and fruitful? Thank you.
Great. Does anybody else want to ask a question before I go back to the panel? This person just over here.
Thank you. I'm Verena Zappei, and I'm from GIZ, German Development Corporation. Actually, my question is very similar, but I just pose it anyway. I was wondering, because I really appreciate the fact that you are putting together so many different marginalized communities, so from prisoners to displaced persons, poor people, LGBTQ+. And my question is from a development cooperation perspective. Of course, we aim to, target the different communities, but most of the time, in the end, we kind of find ourselves in a competitive situation in which the different communities have to compete for funds and, and attention. And so we work maybe on poverty reduction, but then we work also on gender and LGBTQ. And I was wondering, maybe you have a better solution, or my question would be like, first of all, if you face also this challenge of competition between the communities, and if not, if you really have a solution for that or any ideas how to address it better.
Okay, great. Perfect. Two questions that really do complement one another. So really, what experience do you have of working with or collaborating with or fostering collaboration between different groups experiencing marginalization on different bases and those experiencing corruption, anti-corruption activists, anti-discrimination activists, and then within that, how do we deal with the potential for competition or a lack of common cause, a lack of solidarity? So let's go the other way around. So Maria, your hand went straight up. Please go ahead.
I think it's easier for me to respond because I used to work as educator to educate students who are from the they are diverse and they represent different groups and they care about different issues. And they taught this civic education course where students picked up different social problems, challenges, and they tried to address them. And they were interested in this topic, like inequalities, discrimination, LGBTQ plus community rights, and so on. So this is the key idea of civic education, to empower youth with knowledge and skills to address these issues and to raise public campaign, to raise awareness of society about human rights, about tackling discrimination. So this way we bring together all these issues and try to address them. And another thing that to empower youth, you cannot just give them this knowledge and skills. You need to give them some freedom to practice it. And what did IFES some years back? This activists from alumni of civic education course, they wanted to establish their NGO and to continue this work together from different regions of Ukraine. And IFES supported the establishment of this NGO that is still functioning during the full-scale war. Students in different regions, in different universities, they collaborate and they do different online discussions, debates. They gather youth in the towns and cities. And this way we give them this power to address these challenges and also discuss corruption issues, marginalization, inequalities, and do it themselves and for youth by youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe Ruben, do you want to tell us about your experience of working with anti-corruption actors, or indeed working with other organizations campaigning on discrimination issues?
Well, I think that in this context, our experience is working just as a social organizations, because we are kind of alone, and that's why we need international cooperation to keep our work going. So it's not that simple to be defending human rights in our context, but also anti-corruption actions, because, for example, the government is not interested in transparency, but also the corporations are also not that interested in support our work. I think that. We have worked with very few corporations in our country that they are sensitive with our fights. So I think that most of our work is focused just in the civil society organizations, and we are helped or supported by the international cooperation.
Thank you. Brigitte, I mean, you're coming at the issue of corruption from a starting point as an expert in gender policy and law. So what's your experience of bringing these two things together and working with actors and activists from those different movements, if you like?
Yes, we have a very successful work with different actors, because when we work on access to justice, and in all our program, we always divide our work on 3 levels. So we work directly on individual level with women, youth, children, and others, so to build their knowledge, to provide them by legal consultancies, legal support, to get some recommendation for them. And we succeed to establish a network of 60 paralegals from community, from women survivors, from youth, to help us to spread the information within their communities. And on the other hand, we work on the community level and with community representatives. So we have a lot of work done with Beirut and Tripoli Bar Associations. So we have a work with them. We have a work with different ministries, and they are participating in all our activities, especially activities related to policies. When we have any new policies to submit or to discuss, they are present. I will mention Minister of Justice, Minister of Social Affairs, Minister of Education, Minister of Information, and they are even they are running. We are running activities under their patronage, and we are getting some commitment from them. And we have a lot of work done with security forces. So we are covering all part. We work in universities, and this is very successful because we are bringing all part. And at the end, we work on the systemic level. And I mean by systemic level, it's not necessary just to work on law amendments, but we work on changing behaviors, on building, I don't want to say on systemic level, we don't use the word of building capacities, but we have roundtables, we try to submit new policy papers to be adopted. And answering the question of the lady regarding communities, what I want to mention that sometimes we have some funds coming from outside to be implemented in Lebanon. Within, the fund comes from a context to be implemented in another context. I think it is very important to think about localization, one. And the second one, it is as well very important to have the need assessment, to run a need assessment, and to involve all community members so we can know. And if we just have a look on the program implemented, I will talk about Lebanon. There is big funds that had been paid for governments, for other institutions, but at the end, when the program finished, everything was finished there. It's because there is a program that the donor wants to implement it. But when we involve people to design, to put what are their needs, and to invite them all to be part. It's not only to not give the all fund for one organization, but to strengthen different organizations, not only in Beirut, but to go more abroad. It will be, from my point of view, better. And I just want to give an example. There is millions of dollars spent in Lebanon, okay, to support vulnerable groups, to support others, but at the end, still the problem as it is. Nothing changed. We have the same vulnerability, same problem, and we don't have. So this is why we have to think. And finally, I just want to recommend, because whatever is the situation, we always go to support, to support programs, to provide social support, psychosocial support, to provide food and whatever, and always we forgot the justice component. It is very, very, very important to start, when thinking about humanitarian support, to put the justice component in our strategy, because at the end, victims need justice. Without justice, there is no peace. Without justice, there is no security. Without justice, we will always have discrimination. Without justice, we will not have equality, nothing. So it's very important to work and to start thinking about how to include justice even when talking about humanitarian programs, and even how to run programs in Lebanon regarding justice matter. Thank you.
An impassioned plea. Thank you. Norin, did you want to come in on this point? No. Okay, then the gentleman here was right in my eye line. He raised his hand already. And I think, in addition to you, sir, we'll have an opportunity for one more question. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Joaquin Vallejo. I'm the Deputy Director for Democracy and Governance at the Pan American Development Foundation in Washington, D.C. I'm very happy you brought up localization, because it's something that we hear about, especially with with those of us who work with U.S. government funds. But there's a huge challenge in terms of the ability of groups that represent marginalized communities to be able to implement programs with funds from international cooperation because of the bureaucracy that all of that implies. And it's kind of a vicious cycle where the organizations that acquire the knowledge, skills, system, etc., to implement those kinds of funds get further and further disconnected from the populations that they are meaning to serve. And therefore their motivations change. And the benefit of having marginalized populations fighting for corruption is that they have an inherent motivation, they have more skin in the game, they are the ones who suffer the impacts of corruption more and more and more. In the era of localization, which is much easier said than done, how can we as international organizations, as organizations that already possess these systems, help cut that circle, cut that vicious cycle and try to raise the voices of marginalized populations without falling into the same dynamic over and over again? Thank you.
Okay, a properly challenging question there. So we'll just take one more from the gentleman just here. And
I'm sorry for my English. I'm Christian from Transparency International in Congo-Brazzaville. You mentioned that justice is linked to peace, discrimination, and so on and so on. How will we deal with wake the justice and eventually where there is no rule of law in the country? How will you deal with that? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm glad I'm moderating, not answering. So one question is just the simple, how do international NGOs localize in a way that is appropriate and that properly supports organizations at the grassroots level? How do they cut through these kind of vicious cycles? And then just as a really nice one to finish on, how do we do any of this in societies where there's limited respect for rule of law, which is obviously absolutely central to both the fight against discrimination and corruption? So, nice, easy questions for the last 10 minutes. Who would like to start us off? Noreen.
I start with the first question. I think it's only based on my organization experience and Cambodian context. I think that it's not easy, like you mentioned, that you can go directly from international donor funder directly to local community-based organization or activists. But there's an effort that try to empower medium-sized local organization. You cannot go directly to small side NGO, especially activists and community-led activists or community-based organization, but you can build and empower local organizations. And there is a trend, especially in Cambodia, that before there are a lot of funding go directly to international NGOs working in the country. For example, you may go for election, you go to IOI, NDI, and so on, IFES, and for humanitarian, you go to CARE Cambodia, World Vision, and so on. But there's a trend within donor that they try to give opportunity to local organizations, build them capacity, give them experience to manage small-size and medium-sized funding, and hopefully in the future we can move to that direction. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got two questions. So, Brigitte,
Yes.
which would you like to tackle, or would you like to have a go at both?
Both of them, yes. First, regarding the localization, I want to tell you at first the bureaucracy is killing us. It's very difficult, and sometimes a very good organizations that are losing programs because of the bureaucracy and the high standard level of writing proposals that they are asking. So I think this is one challenge that we have to think about. This is first. Secondly, there is different program, and I think USAID as well, they had some fund for small organizations. small initiative. And the aim of this small fund is to build capacities of this organization. So we can work on the organization itself to build their capacity, to have the needed policy, to establish a complete system for them to be able to have better. They are having good work, but maybe to have a better work with regard of the donor. And there is already some initiatives done by several donors regarding this matter. And there is different ways that could be done. It could be done with partnering with good organization and having other organization to be part of it and having this monitoring, reporting system, meal system, everything. But again, this small organization, they are able to reach more people. And the big mistake that donors are doing right now is providing the big amount of money. Sometimes it's reaching $1 million to one organization. And at the end, nothing changed on the ground. This is one. Two, regarding peace, it's a big question. But if we have a quick read, we read what is happening in our country. And I want to mention about the Middle East. What is happening in Lebanon, what is happening in Gaza is because we have the immunity system. When we talk about the immunity system, first on the national level, and there is the immunity system on the international level where some countries are benefiting from. We cannot reach justice unless we have the political will to prosecute, to investigate, and to end the impunity. And I think now with what is happening in Lebanon, we had, I'm talking in different matter, but since we are talking about justice, when we had the first declaration issued by the Lebanese government to declare the ICC jurisdiction regarding crimes committed against journalists in Lebanon, it was a very good initiative, but after that, Lebanon, he stopped this declaration. And what is happening now in Palestine and in Gaza itself, and this big debate within the International Criminal Court, I think this is the first part, this is the first step to combat the impunity, and it will take long time. It will not be ended within 1 month or 1 year, but it's a long step. And if we don't fight the impunity, crimes will continue to be committed on the international level and on the national level and against the marginalized group. This is why it is very important to focus on the rule of law, to work on justice, to build the knowledge of people how to access justice, and to not wait justice, and to not wait that people come to us to ask justice, especially vulnerable groups, because vulnerable groups, they don't care about corruption. Corruption are part of their daily life. They care about how to eat, how to feed their children, how to have. So we have to go to them and bring justice to them. We have to change all our system regarding this matter. And again, this is what I believe. Without justice, we cannot reach nothing.
Thank you, Brigitte, for that. Maria, Ruben, would you like to pick up on either one of these questions?
Brigitte inspired to say a couple of words on the second question about justice. We are talking here about nurturing attitudes, anti-corruption culture, changing behavior, but it's only one side of solving this problem. So the big side is building this anti-corruption architecture by policies, institutions, regulations, and so on. And I can give one example, again, talking about hope and how this issue was addressed in Ukraine. In higher education, we had a very successful reform how to combat corruption in higher education back in mid-2000s. Our government established external independent evaluation after secondary school. It was only one way of admission higher education institutions since 2005. So before that, each university could have own exam, and it could be like oral exam. And you have no equality, you have no provement how students entered university. So there was high-scale corruption in this area. And when the new procedure was established, you cannot cheat, you cannot avoid. Like it's independent, it's external, it's blind, and all graduates were put in equal position. No matter from rich family or poor family, you will have the same external exam. You cannot access it like beforehand. And just when Russia invaded in 2022, there was a question and a big debate around this reform, because the former Minister of Education said that our children now in such a stress, let's demolish this external examination. And people were, like, the nation basically was against, and they started debating and saying that no, this was such a successful reform to establish equality in like entry exam to universities. We cannot just withdraw it. So we are keeping it even now, to be transformed, but still we have this because it was recognized as one of the most successful reform even by general population.
Thank you, Maria. Ruben, I'm afraid I think we're going to run out of time. So it just falls to me to try to wrap around the many different valuable contributions and questions that have come up in the course of this panel. And I would just say, I mean, I think, Maria, you've pointed the way towards that. When we started our work with Transparency International on this issue, one of the TI Secretariat staff published a blog, Discrimination and Corruption, Two Sides of the Same Coin, ? And that was really our first foray together into this issue. Through the research that we've done, it's clear that these two things are not two sides of the same coin. Discrimination and corruption are discrete harms. They have their own legal definitions, they have their own mechanisms. People experience them in different ways. But if this is a Venn diagram, there is a huge area of overlap. And if we want to develop credible solutions, just like the one that you pointed to the problems that people really face, which are about lack of education, lack of food, lack of resources. That's what people care about, not about discrimination, not about corruption, but how can I make my life chances better? Then understanding how these two things interact and developing policy mechanisms that can address both of the different dynamics, I think is crucial. And to that, collaboration, partnership, mutual learning, exactly as Jamie pointed to, I think has got to be the way forward. So this panel is a great example of how a dialogue between different actors from different places, approaching it from different perspectives, can help us identify solutions. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for your time. Thank you to Outright International for convening this panel. Thank you to all of you for being here and for your contributions. It's been my pleasure, so thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.